Welcome back to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. And we have a story on the spookier side right now. Boys and ghouls, allow me to tell you about the mad doctor who injects himself with an experimental serum, turning the scientist into a hideous monster that terrorizes a hospital. This twisted tale is from the mind of Richard Lyford, a 19-year-old indie filmmaker in Seattle who wrote, directed, and starred in the short horror film The Scalpel. But he wasn't influenced by horror legends like John Carpenter or Wes Craven or even George Romero. No, The Scalpel was filmed in 1936, and film historians considered it lost for almost 90 years. It's now been restored and re-edited, and it just had its debut on Saturday in Portland. It's been accepted to more than 150 film festivals throughout the country. And none of this would have happened without composer and producer Ed Hartman. He joins me now. Ed, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on the film's debut in festival.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So first of all, how did you find out about Richard Lyford's work? I mean, what was so compelling about bringing it back?
Well, it found me. And the story goes back to 2013. There was a thread on Classic Horror Film Board, a chat board, about a Halloween video called Monsters Crash the Pajama Party. And that was made by Something Weird distributors in Seattle. Through detective work, they were able to figure out that there was a couple of short fragments in that they were silent films, and they figured out from Richard Lyford's own writing, an American cinematographer. Eventually they contacted Richard's great niece in Seattle. She took over the Richards film estate and digitized the film. In 2017, she asked me to score one of the films called As the Earth Turns, and that's a 45-minute 1937 silent sci-fi film by Lyford. That went a massive film festival run, and it's been on Turner Classic Movies. You can see it on Amazon, that sort of thing. Anyway, she gave me the physical film collection and film estate. A lot of them were commercial, military, educational stuff. I followed up with Something Weird and eventually confirmed they had the fragments of the video, and that included Ritual of the Dead and The Scalpel. So we actually scanned them at that point. 2021, I did a documentary about Lyford. And then in 2024, last year, I was preparing films, all these stock films, for transfer to Periscope Films in Los Angeles. They're an archive company. And I found a can I hadn't seen. It was the first half of The Scalpel. So you have to understand that I had already scored the second half in 2017. But last year, I found the first half of it. Looking at my little 16-millimeter viewer, we had it digitized. It was kind of more bleached out. But we were able to, with color correction, perfectly match it to the second half of the film. Now, you got to understand something about this, because the second half of the film came from Something Weird. The first half of the film came from his son in New York State. 90 years later, they edited together perfectly. Okay, that's insane.
Wow.
How rare that kind of situation is. And this is only 2.5 films of the 9 films he did before he was 20. So anyway, since then, we put this through a massive film festival run as well, and it's doing very, very well.
What did it feel like when you opened up that can and realized you had the first part of the film? I mean, how, for you, as somebody who was working on a documentary or had already made a documentary about Richard Lyford, you had scored the second half. What did it feel like to actually discover the first half?
Well, my brain exploded because I never thought I would ever see it. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, if I'm going to score this, what do I do? Because I already scored the second half. Luckily, I kept my sessions from that, and I even have sheet music for the second half of the film. So I was able to create the first half based on that and tie them together. And that was really kind of a neat challenge, to be able to continue a score, but doing it backwards. And in fact, the second half of the film starts off with the theme that I made the front of the film to, the credit sequence. So it took a little bit of engineering to pull that off. Luckily, we were also able to use the same engineering and pretty much the same team to put together the mastering and the whole score itself. And it came out very well. And I know that the film is whole because he wrote about these things, and I knew it was supposed to be about 20 minutes, and that's exactly how long the film is.
Can you tell us, who was Richard Lyford? I mean, this is a 19-year-old making this stuff. on a low budget, obviously. And today, when you watch it, I'm amazed at the quality, at the acting, at the special effects he jerry rigs. I mean, who is this guy and what made his work special?
Yeah, well, no, this guy is very unique. He lived in Seattle, up on Mount Baker, in the neighborhood up there, and his dad was in the timber industry, and I think wanted him to join that, but he was not that into it. So he started somehow he got a camera loaned or whatever when he was in his early teens and started to film. Not unlike I had a Super 8 camera, when I was growing up too.
But this was the 30s. I mean,
Yeah, this is the third. See, yeah, he was developing his own film, and doing all this stuff with no budget, zero budget. Although he was a hard worker, he did graphics and signage for companies. Probably worked for Nordstrom's a little bit. He could draw with both hands at the same time. I mean, this guy was borderline genius. Any way I look at it. So he got involved heavily into it. I know he was really turned on by films. Horror films especially, and I think horror films are good for early filmmakers because when you think about it, dramas and comedies are very, very tough to do. But a horror film, you can kind of get away with a little more. It can be scary or gory or whatever, and people will forgive the rest of it. They're not looking for necessarily high quality. But he did a really good job. So again, he was really nailing this stuff, and we only have, again, 2.5 of these films from the set. Anyway, he did all this stuff as a kid, and then he winds up going to LA. He gets hired by Disney and works on Fantasia, Dumbo, and Pinocchio. He gets drafted. Disney hands him his draft papers. Disney lost about 20, 30 people that year in 1941 or whatever. And he went to war. He worked for the Army Air Forces. He came back after the war, did his own independent work. Eventually, he directed a Michelangelo documentary with Robert Snyder and Robert Flaherty, who did Nanook of the North. This guy was working with the best people in the world, and a few other projects in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, there's all sorts of stuff going on in what he did. But he's kind of the most unknown filmmaker you're going to run into. And like a lot of filmmakers, I mean, we think about a Spielberg or something like that. The majority of filmmakers, you don't know about them because they go into commercial work. They want to make a living. They have kids, they have families, and they aren't necessarily doing the Hollywood thing. So that's the big question that you ask, why do we not know about this guy? Because like most of us, life got in the way for whatever reason. But he still had an extraordinary career and did very well. It's just he didn't quite do the Orson Welles thing, although he was similar to Orson Welles almost exactly in lifespan. And I think he would have loved to have that as well.
What were some of the techniques that he was using in his backyard, basically, in the 30s in Seattle that you were impressed by when you first discovered his work?
Well, in the Scalpel, there is a particular transformation. There's actually a couple of them. And he perfectly matched a transition that Karl Struss did in Jekyll and Hyde, 1931. Now, you got to think about this. That's an Academy Award-winning cinematographer who pulled off an incredible monster transition in that film, and Lyford matched it perfectly. I mean, he must have used it as a model for that, and it uses lighting effects and makeup, so it's not the typical transition you're expecting at all. Just freakish. So, that alone is worth a watch for this film because it's extraordinary, actually. He had a cast and crew of up to 100 people for some films, and he did most of the filmmaking in his house. I'm sure his folks love that. But, I've been in the house, and it's a wonderful house. The other thing about the house that's unique is in the basement, he made a theater. It was called the Oriental Theater. And it had an entrance in the back because it was daylight, and that went through the garage to a street like a back alley. And that way he could have his audience come in through there.
So he would screen like his own work in his theater in the basement?
He had theatrical seats installed in there.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like with a proscenium stage with kind of an Asian look. And he would do stage productions as well. Initially, they were staged, and then he got into film. He wrote 58 stage and screenplays before he was 20 and 9 films. That's astounding.
I'm speaking with Ed Hartman, a Seattle area composer who helped restore the work of Richard Lyford, a filmmaker who was working in Seattle in the 1930s. Most recently, Ed is bringing The Scalpel, a 1936 horror film, to movie festivals this summer. It just debuted in Portland. Ed, what kind of approach? I know you talked about the challenge of knitting together the second half and the first half, but when it comes to bringing new audio signatures to a film like this, what kind of approach did you take for The Scalpel?
Well, with As the Earth Turns, the film I did initially, I was given, pretty much carte blanche to do whatever I wanted to, because she gave me the film estate, and that was really nice. What's tough about these films is that the director is deceased. It's hard enough scoring with a living director. You might have to redo a scene 17 times over or more. That's the nature of the game. But with these films, I didn't really know. What was kind of frightening about As the Earth Turns is when I got about halfway through scoring, we discovered that Richard Lyford had experimented with adding sound to his silent films. Sound had been around in Hollywood in the late 20s and early 30s, but he didn't have access to it. What he did do was he took dual turntables and synchronized them to a 60 millimeter projector. One reason why Disney hired him for those types of technological ideas. And he wrote about this stuff. Okay, that means to me, he had a playlist. Oh my God. I didn't know what the playlist was. I did interview his son, and I did discover that he liked Stravinsky and Dvorak and that sort of thing. And my scores are definitely classical and period. So I think they're fine on there. And that's the type of music I really like for silent films. For The Scalpel, I did use kind of a gothic score. I love organ in there. It's an orchestral score, but there's organ that kind of underlines things. Organs just adds, I don't know what it adds. It's just this intensity. All of a sudden, you just feel it. It's
The
like early
gothicness
electronic
of
music.
it. Yeah.
It really does. Well, yeah, the organ itself. So, the themes I used are kind of a little bit Baroque sounding and eerie and that sort of thing. And then at times, the film starts that way, and then it kind of degrades, and eventually, or my score kind of gets a little more experimental by nature, and the piano gets a little creepy and stuff like that. So it's a mix of stuff, but in general, it tends to be fairly coherent within that. With a short film like this, you really don't have time to get too much into lots of development or anything like that. So it's really just kind of full scored from one to the other. And my process tends to be improvisational by nature, and then I go back and orchestrate from there.
Before we go, Ed, why do you think it's important to show the world this work that was made in Seattle in the 30s, Richard Lyford's filmmaking? What drew you to want to bring it back?
Well, the first time I started seeing these films, I was blown away myself. I thought, what is this stuff? I mean, I had no idea who this guy was or anything. And, the quality, again, the acting quality, the effects, all the rest of it, yeah, you could look at it a little bit cheesy and that sort of thing, but it was on par with everything that was going on in the 30s. I mean, As the Earth Turns is very similar to Flash Gordon by nature, and that was very popular. So he was matching, quality of Hollywood in Seattle with no money. And I see anybody who's interested in film, especially filmmakers, they can watch a movie like this and go, wow, this guy did this. And he didn't have a phone to do, or he didn't have a video camera. He didn't even have modern filmmaking equipment. He had a wind up Kodak Model B camera. And you have to, again, take out the film and put it all back in. And some of the effects he did within the camera, which means he has to rewind and do them over again. So, I think, again, this is the kind of thing that shows filmmakers that they can do things without having a budget, because it all comes down to the story. If you don't have a good story, you got nothing. I don't care what the gear is. And every filmmaker will tell you this. When we did As the Earth Turns, we did a 7-day theatrical in Los Angeles. There was an LA Times review, and the reviewer said that had Spielberg had a 60 millimeter camera in the 1930s, he would have made something like As the Earth Turns.
I love
And
that.
that's a total tribute, in itself. So I think you have to look at this historically. One other interesting quote is that Disney told his son that Richard Lyford could tell a story in 30 minutes better than anybody he knew. And that's coming from Walt Disney. So, whoever this guy is, I think the world needs to know. I've been working on a screenplay about it, too, about his first 20 years in Seattle.
I mean, you talk about, young filmmakers and run and gun type of stuff where they don't get permits and they're sort of like
That's right.
MacGyvering things together. He was probably one of the OGs back in 1930s.
Yeah.
Ed Hartman, Seattle area composer who has helped restore Richard Lyford's work, a Seattle-based filmmaker who was working in the 1930s here. The most recent is the 1936 horror film The Scalpel. You can see The Scalpel in Tacoma at the Zion International Film Festival on Saturday, June 28th, and it's going to be screening in other festivals soon as well. It debuted in Portland recently. Ed, it has been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.